All right. All good. All good. Hey, so last week, if you're following through in the notes, we're up to page 9. Last week, we just had, an introduction as to the idea of culture, the culture around us, and the idea of how we as Christians interact with the culture around us. Sorry, there might be a need to maybe squash in just a little bit from the edges on a couple of rows, just to squeeze a few more people in. So on page 9, we're picking up on this idea of worldviews. The idea of worldviews and how, what are worldviews, why do they matter, and what real difference does it make as we look at the world around us. I'm going to try and just go through the first half of this chapter probably a little quicker and spend a little bit more time looking at three different worldviews in the second half. So, as we just sort of look first up at these sort of introductory matters about worldviews, and again, feel free just to yell out, interact, and ask questions if you like, comments if you like, things that might be helpful for the group. It's good to mull these things over and churn them over as we go. So if we're looking at worldviews, it is important, just like we said last week, to interact with the culture around us, understand the culture, what we do with the culture. Are we just going to walk along with the culture, or do we interact it, do we critique it? And we suggested last week that given our 21st century context, we don't necessarily just 100% reject the culture around us, but we do have a privileged position of being able to critique the culture around us, interact with the culture around us, and hopefully have some influence in the culture around us. We look back at church history and said that some parts of church history, they just had to reject the culture around them. They had no say in the culture around them. You think of the early church in the first century, they had no real say in the culture around them. They just had to reject everything that was going on, obviously pray for the culture around them, but they couldn't really be part of that to a large degree. But we want to interact with it. So in terms of the worldviews, I guess if you're looking at the notes, about halfway down page 9 there's a sentence in bold. A Christian worldview, and we're thinking about just establishing our own worldview, it enables us to look at all of life through a scriptural lens, which in turn equips us to defend the faith, evangelize wisely, critique unbiblical thought that pervades our culture, and then bring glory to God in all life. So then the next obvious question is, what is a worldview? That's in 2.2 there. So a good definition, I think, comes from James Sire's book. That was The Universe Next Door. That was one of the books that I had here last week, by the way. A worldview is a set of presuppositions which may be true, partially true, or entirely false. Okay, so just we'll pause there and realise that a worldview is a view of the world that people have, and it might be right, it might be completely wrong, or it might be somewhere in between, but it's a worldview that they have, right? So a set of presuppositions that might be true, partially true, or entirely false, which we hold. And we might hold those consciously, subconsciously, we might hold them consistently, or we might hold them inconsistently. Okay, but it's a set of presuppositions that we hold about the basic makeup of our world. So if you forget the brackets in that sentence there, down at the bottom of page 9, a set of presuppositions which we hold about the basic makeup of the world. All right, so that's kind of the idea. So everyone looks at the world through a set of lenses, and we can't help that. There is no one that looks at the world completely objectively, with the exception of God. Okay, we come to the world having been the product of our parents, of the education that we've had, of the experiences that we've had. We come to the world based on and we look at the world through even through the culture around us. The culture around us has conditioned us to some degree, and that's evident. We are a group of Bible-believing Christians here, and if we had a group of Bible-believing Christians from Ethiopia with us, we would look at the world and understand things in a slightly different way, just because we are products of our environment to a large extent. Now, like the definition said, not everyone is aware of his or her worldview. A lot of people just wander through life thinking that the way that they look at the world is the way that everybody should look at the world. And we see that. So I lived 2.5 years in the US, and Americans are brilliant at this. They just assume that the world is the way that they see it, and this is a gross generalisation. Sorry if there's any Americans here. And so when they walk into another culture in another part of the world, they really struggle to understand the fact that another part of the world just looks at the world differently, and they have different customs, and the things don't work the way that it does back in New York or in Chicago or in Los Angeles, and so not everyone is aware of the fact that they have a particular worldview, and one of the as we go through this, one of the critical things we as Christians, when we engage the world, is to help people see their worldview, understand the fact that they do have a lens that's on there. And then we start to engage with their worldview and show them how their worldview actually isn't rationally consistent. And so because we'll try and work this through as over the time, I'm going to contend that the biblical worldview is the only logical, rationally consistent worldview that there is. Okay? And so it's good to be able to look at other people's worldviews and lovingly, carefully, just maybe deconstruct them a little bit, and then help to build them up with build into them a biblical worldview, with the idea of hopefully that being a pathway to the gospel. Yes.
Yeah, so I wasn't here last week when you might have touched on culture.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to imagine where the line of culture and worldview, or is it one, or is there a line in this?
Yeah, so culture is going to inform our worldview essentially. So we talked a little bit about culture and how we should interact with culture. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's elements of the culture that we can look to interact with and be part of and maybe redeem. But there is other parts of culture that we have to just sort of reject. There might be the likes of pornography, there might be racism, there might be abortion and those sorts of things. We have something to say about those things, but we're not part of those things. Yet things like the arts, we can interact with those things. There's good parts about the arts. There's bad parts about the arts, and so I guess the idea there when we were talking about last week was that not everything in the world is bad, not everything in the world is good. God made it good, it's fallen, and we're going to try and interact with culture. And now as we bring worldviews into this, we need to realise that all that cultural stuff that's around us then builds into the way that we look at the world. And so what we want to try and do here is we have taken a little bit of a step now to the topic of worldviews, is we want to just be able to interact with those out there in the world who have a different view of the world, and help them see and unveil their view of the world, because not everyone is aware of their worldview. And in fact, I'd say most people just aren't aware of their worldview. Help them see the lens that they've got on, maybe to take that off and put a biblical lens on. I don't know if that answered the question at all.
Yeah,
but
good. So does everyone have a worldview?
Everyone's going to have a worldview. Yeah, I'd say the only person that looks without a lens on would be God. So we come to the world with a whole lot of presuppositions, and we just the basic way that the world should work, or the way that we think the world works. And you step into another culture and you realise that they have a massively different view of the world than we do. You guys have experienced that, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to just define whether what I was saying was culture or worldview.
Yeah, and I think the culture informs worldview. Yeah. So the way the culture that they are part of is going to form the worldview. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm currently reading a book based in China back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And it's the way that they're studying Confucian thought, and they just are so committed to studying that. And when I lived in Asia, you would see people so committed to study. So there's been a long line of culture. Yeah. Like Confucius lived at the time of Nehemiah and Ezra. Sure. And they were so committed to studying that, but you still see that study mentality. Yeah. 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 It's a hard one to define, but yeah.
So their view of the world
Yes.
then is part of the view of the world, is that it would hold probably that study is almost an idol in terms of it's an ideal. It is
Yes.
something that has to be attained to. If you don't study, then you are less of a human being, etc., right? So their culture and their background has informed the way that they look at the world, the values that they put on the world, the way that they will look at other people that don't conform to their kind of understanding, right? So the culture informs the worldview. Yeah. And of course, we come along with, just in that particular instance, we come along with a biblical worldview and realise that God is a God who has revealed himself, and it is good to study who God is. And so we do hold, the education, the Western education system, the church Sunday school system was all a result of Christians realising that it's helpful for literacy to be part of the culture, because then we can read the Bible, understand who God is. So we come to that to say that yes, that is a really helpful tool, but we don't place it to the point of idolatry in terms of saying that this is the absolute ideal or the peak of humanity, etc., etc. Christ-likeness is the peak of humanity. Yeah. So we interact with those. It's helpful to identify those worldviews, then sometimes just pick them apart a little bit and then put into those worldviews a biblical worldview. Okay, cool. We've gone a little bit further down the track there. We've jumped a couple of steps, but let's keep going. Thanks for that, Abe. That's really helpful. All right. So we were saying that the worldview is a person's philosophical and theological presuppositions. Okay, presuppositions mean the things that you presuppose, the things that you understand. That kind of like a deep level of understanding. I think it says here in the notes there, the things that you believe at your deepest kind of gut level. You might not have an understanding or an explanation as to why you believe that, but the things that are just kind of base level, gut level understandings. So a really good part of Western civilization, and in fact most civilizations, but Western civilization it uncovers itself quite clearly, is that at a gut level, it is most of the Western civilization realizes that it's wrong to steal, and that it is somehow right or virtuous to be giving or philanthropic or the likes. And a lot of people, when you break it down, when you ask them why, they kind of like, I'm not sure. It just seems like it's a good idea. Or society works well, and they can't at that gut level can't explain it. But that's where we're getting to a worldview. They might hold it rationally, they might hold it irrationally. They might know why they hold that, and they might not know that. Of course, we would look at that and say, well, Western civilization has a foundation of Judeo-Christianity, and that is so from a biblical basis, we can say exactly why giving is good, stealing is bad, etc. Sorry, we'll keep on going. I said I was going to try and get through the first half quickly, right? This might be an example of where we have 2 weeks at one chapter. All right. So the worldview. Then there's suggested 5 in the notes here. Suggested 5 areas in which a worldview interacts with. 1, God. And particularly when we look at a Christian worldview, then this is incredibly important. But all worldviews interact with these ideas to one degree or another. God. Who is God? Our idea of God is by far the most important component of our worldview. So it asks the question: is there a God? Okay. So and of course some worldviews would hold no. But is there a God? If so, what is he like? Is he a personal God? Is he an impersonal force, like Star Wars? Does he care about us? All those sort of questions. 2, reality, which is the study, if you've ever come across the word metaphysics. It was kind of a pretty common cultural, bit kind of a trendy term there, particularly maybe 2 decades ago. idea, a study of metaphysics, which is really just a study of reality. It's the study of what is the universe, who created it, is it a product of conscious design, is it random chance, is there meaning or purpose? Metaphysics often looks into that, meaning or purpose. And then of course, what is the purpose? Everyone with any worldview wants to answer these questions. What's the purpose of us all being here? Is there just no purpose? 3, man. Okay, and it's often called anthropology or sociology, psychology, if we're getting into the in terms of the study of the mind. So, what is the nature of man? Are we just physical bodies, or bodies and spirits? Just as a side note here, the Darwinian kind of atheistic view of the world obviously has to come to the point of view that we are just physical bodies, and it's alarming how much of the society around us has taken on that presupposition into their worldview, that we are just a product of evolution. Then, you know how we said that they hold the presuppositions consistently or inconsistently? So they'll say that we're just a product of evolution. Then they'll be 100% inconsistent and say, but human beings, we should value the life of human beings above the life of ants or cats or dogs. Well, that's completely inconsistent. If we're all just a product of evolution, we all came from the same pool of goo somewhere, then it's completely inconsistent to say that one species is more important than another species. So the worldviews get very inconsistent very quickly as we start to peel back the layers. So man, are we basically good, or are we basically bad? I think that's a delineation that we are going to start to see more and more happening in our political sphere at the moment. It's been a big part of the US culture or political culture for a long time. There is a group that is going to say that we are basically good, that humanity is basically good, and therefore we need to address systemic sort of things. It's not man's problem that we've got criminals and the like, so we shouldn't be punishing the criminals. We need to fix the system. Okay, so we need to do things like defund the police, legalize cannabis, all those sorts of things. We got because the system is the bad thing, because humanity is basically good. And of course, a different worldview and a different side of politics will say that humanity is, at its fundamental level, we are fallen. And we are bad. We have been redeemed by God and by God's grace. Well, there is goodness that we see in the world, and our fundamental societal push has to be individual responsibility, individual growth, and encouraging the individual right from the cradle all through life to uphold good moral values. And if we uphold good moral values, the systemic stuff will take care of itself. Is man basically good or basically bad? Are we totally free? Are we pawns of fate? What happens after death? Are there rewards or punishments after death? Okay, so that's the study of God, the study of reality, the study of man, study of morality. Are there such things as right and wrong? And who decides which is which? Every single worldview is going to crumble at that point, except Christianity. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Knowledge. If you're into big words, knowledge is a study which is called epistemology. But what's the nature of knowledge? How can we know anything? How can we know something for certain? How far will reason take us? Etc., etc. Is knowledge different from faith? All right. So, we've talked a little bit about the makeup of worldviews there. We've actually already, as we've been going along, we've talked about why we should study worldviews. But if you flick over to page 11, here's just 6 points. I'm not going to go into these things, but just good to look at those, the bolded titles there. 6 reasons as to why we should study the worldviews. 1, because we want to develop ours. We want to make sure our view of the world is how God sees the world as much as possible. We're fallen human beings. We'll never be perfect at it, but we try to make sure ours is the biblical worldview in as much as possible. then we wanted to be able to defend our faith. And we wanted to be able to defend our faith with reason, with care, and with strength, but also with compassion. So 3, then we can evangelize better. If we're able to defend our own faith, we'll be able to evangelize better and interact with other people's worldviews better. 4, to identify and reject false teaching. Yeah? There is false teaching all over the place, and it's not just way out there in the world. It is part of our wider Christian culture. And as we build our own Christian worldview, we're going to be able to help to identify and of course put aside false teaching far more easily. 5, to grow in cultural discernment. The world around us is moving further and further and further away from biblical ideas and biblical ideals. There's no two ways around that, and so we want to be able to discern the culture around us, still engage and celebrate the things that are still we can still see God working in the culture and godly ideas in the culture, but be able to discern very carefully along the way. And 6, to glorify God in all of our life. If we are understanding God better, we glorify God better. We are transformed by the renewing of our mind. That's Romans 12:2. Right. How are we doing for time? I'll just make sure we're good. There's a note there, 2.3.1. Doesn't the Bible warn us against philosophy? And that's Colossians 2 verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of the world rather than on Christ. So what Paul's talking about there is not to be ignorant of philosophies, but not to be taken captive by those philosophies. So if we're not going to be taken captive by those philosophies, we should understand a biblical worldview, a biblical philosophy, so that we can not be captive by the world's philosophies. So it's good to develop or understand philosophies around us, and of course develop our own Christian worldview. And then, again, just these 5 points here on page 12. How do we develop a Christian worldview? So here's just some suggestions. 1, soak your mind in Scripture. Just keep taking in the Bible. Keep it flowing over you. Keep developing or keep being challenged by the Word of God, so that you are because as you go through it, no matter how far down the track you are in your Christian walk, there'll be something you come across and you think, man, that actually challenges something that I understand in my mind, that I thought I had nailed, and so we want to just continually, moment by moment, or just inch by inch, bring our worldview into line with Scripture. 2, understand the whole storyline of Scripture and how we apply different parts of it to our lives today. We had a look at systematic theology last year. You might have been here for that. But the idea of understanding the whole storyline, the whole narrative of Scripture is the idea of biblical theology. And we'll do a class on that at some stage, Lord willing. But it's the idea of putting that whole story together, and as we put that whole narrative together, we can understand then how God has worked through history, through biblical history, and then it helps us to apply those principles, those themes that we see all the way through Scripture. It helps us apply those to our Christian life. 3, synthesize the teaching of Scripture on individual topics. That is called systematic theology. So as you're interacting with a topic, we use the idea of prayer a lot in the systematic theology class. Look at every part of the Bible that it talks about prayer, and something like a concordance. The concordance in the back of your Bible is a great place to start on that, and then you can just build up an idea of the teaching on a particular individual topic. Gain, evaluate, integrate knowledge from other sources. Look at good Christian sources. It also means that we look at we can gain knowledge from other sources besides the Bible. There's notes mentioned there. We can understand engineering, we can understand politics, we can understand construction, weather, etc., etc. All those things are good and helpful. But then, to ensure that we are operating from a Christian worldview, we need to evaluate all that information that we get from outside of Scripture and make sure it's consistently fitting with Scripture. So, for example, in the notes there, an evolutionary theory, or at least a macroevolutionary theory, flatly contradicts the Bible. And so, as we interact with the science field and look at some elements and see what it teaches us, we are able to apply our biblical worldview and then reject some elements of society, or some elements of perhaps teaching or knowledge that the world wants to give us. But there's some parts, mathematics as a field, as a really helpful field that can be a real benefit to us as Christians. And then of course we live it out. These classes here shouldn't be just academic, filling our minds. All right. So then the three worldviews. Let's have a quick look at the three worldviews. We'll start today and we'll carry this on next week, I'm sure. So the three worldviews that we're going to have a look at as relates to where we are in 21st century Western New Zealand, right? So where we are coming at it from a Western perspective. We will later on, if you were to look at your table of contents, we're going to have a look at some other world religions. Okay, so they're going to come from an absolutely completely different worldview. But what we want to try and do here is just interact with the worldviews that we're going to find in our Western setting. So if you look ahead at the headings, we're going to have the Christian worldview. And it says there, and its pre-modern cousins, so I'll explain that in a second. So it's the Christian worldview, the modern worldview, and then the postmodern worldview. Okay? So when the modern worldview was being labelled, I think it was a little bit short-sighted, because the modern worldview is a very old worldview now. Okay? So it's no longer modern at all. All right? But anyway, back at the time when it was kind of being implemented, it was very modern. Okay, Christian worldview. So there's a whole lot we could unpack here, but let's just work through those 6 headings there really, really quickly. First, God. The Westminster Confession. Well, in fact, it's pretty long sentence there. Let's read it. There is but one. The Westminster Confession, by the way, if you want to have a look at a really, really thorough and fantastic document about God, about theology, about the church, the Westminster Confession is a fantastic place to go to. It is Presbyterian, hold that in the back of your mind, but it is just excellent in terms of its theology. There is but one only living and true God, who is infinite in being and perfection, a most pure spirit, invisible, without body, parts or passions, immutable, immense, eternal, incomprehensible, almighty, most wise, most holy, most free, most absolute, working all things according to the counsel of his own immutable and most righteous will, for his own glory, most loving, gracious, merciful, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, forgiving iniquity, transgression and sin, the rewarder of them that diligently seek him, and withal most just and terrible in his judgments, hating all sin, and who will by no means clear the guilty. And it notes there that's a very brief description of who God is. I love the fact that the guys back in the Puritan days and the Westminster Confession, which was kind of just out of the Puritan days, they had the ability just to write and write and write about God. They were deep thinkers, and I think we can learn a lot from that period of Christian thought. Second, reality. We believe that everything exists is created by God and exists ultimately to bring him glory. Yeah, so comment. Why don't we have a confession here in this church? As a church as a whole, yeah, it's a great idea, a great question. Sorry, a lot of denominations do have confessions. The Westminster tradition is the basis of most Presbyterian denominations. We have, so our Baptist cousins have, or Baptist brothers and sisters have their Baptist, well, at least in the States, the Baptist faith, and man, what's that one called? They had I think it was in 1886, and then updated it in the year 2000. They have a confession. So because we are historically a Brethren church, the Brethren tradition has taken, and I don't want to be unfair. I don't want to be unfair here, but it kind of has been an undertone of no creed except the Bible, or no statement of confession kind of thing except the Bible. And there's a good reason, there's good rationale for that, and the fact that it's just going to rely on the Bible. Now the problem is though that one group of people can read the Bible and come to one understanding, and another group of people can read the Bible and come to a very different understanding. One of the reasons why, as an eldership, we've just put out a statement of faith and philosophy of ministry, just as it's a micro confession, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And see, that's a problem. If you don't have a confession, two people can read the Bible in different views. The confession is there to actually guide you to the right answers.
Yeah.
Right? And I just feel it's a very good thing to have a confession. If we are actually happy with the Westminster Confession, I'm happy with that. Because I have, somebody asked me about a year ago, you go to that church there, do you have a confession? I said, no, I don't think so. I said, oh, well, what kind of church is that?
Sure, yeah.
So, are you happy with the Westminster Confession as a good confession?
Yeah, by and large, yes. That's just my personal opinion. And in terms of the catechism that comes out of it, I think it's a fantastic catechism. We would probably adjust a couple of questions around baptism in the catechism. So I think yes, it is, and I think that is what you're getting at. There is exactly the reason that as an eldership we have gone down the steps of just putting together a statement of faith that was just a little bit more than the couple of sentences that had been around previously. Just because we realise that while we have had a Brethren tradition that by and large has kind of, we all knew what everyone believed, that doesn't sort of hold water now, because we are a very eclectic mix in a church like this from all sorts of different backgrounds, and it just helps us put some boundaries around what we believe, what we don't believe. The Bible, we believe the Bible does teach this, and it doesn't teach that. So I agree. It's but then we have to also say that no confession is going to be sufficient, right? The Bible is the only completely 100% sufficient document. So anything that we put together as human beings is always going to be, it's never going to be complete. So, but it's good to make a try. It's good to make an attempt at it. All right. So we were talking about reality. Thanks for the comment and the question there. We were talking about reality. Everything exists by God and exists for God's glory. And I'm hoping Romans 8, 28, 29, and I think 30 is a good verse there as well. But we've got Hebrews 1:3, Romans 11:36, etc. that teach that God actively upholds the universe. He is the one that is controlling reality from moment to moment. And so we have a rational explanation of why there is reality. We assume that there is a God, and that we believe that there is a God, and in fact we'll look at some defences for the idea that a God exists in a little while. And so because God exists, there is a functional reality. If there was no God, then reality, well, maybe we are just maybe we're just brains in jars sitting on some alien's shelf somewhere, and this thing that we're experiencing, this consciousness, has been injected into us by the aliens. Prove to me that that's not wrong if there's not a God. You can't prove that that's not wrong, that we're just brains in jars and an alien has injected into us some sort of concept of reality. We believe there's a real reality, that this chair is real and this piano here is real because there is a God. Third, man. We believe that man is created by God in order to bring God glory. and we are a willing moral agent. We are accountable to God, and that while we were created perfect, we have all sinned, and so that we have fallen short, and we have a problem, and we need to be redeemed by God. So that's God. That 1, God. 2, reality. 3, man. 4, knowledge. We believe that we can have knowledge, and we can have certain knowledge because God does. God has certain knowledge. He knows things, and He has allowed us to know things. The whole idea of Western the whole Western science, or the study of science, is predicated on the idea that there is a God, and He has put this universe into play, which has logical and consistent scientific laws. You know, the likes of Newton and those guys, that's what they believed, and so they pursued what we now call modern science. It is because God is knowable, He has knowledge, and so we can also have knowledge. 5th, it says number 6 there, but it's 5th, sorry, morality. There's only 5 there. How did the numbering get messed up there? Sorry. Morality. We believe there is such a thing as right and wrong, which almost all cultures do believe, maybe with the exception of the anarchists. I don't know. There is such a thing as right and wrong, although it's amazing how postmodernism has pushed down that path so far that there is no right and wrong. And yet if you punch them in the nose, they'll think that's wrong. I don't know. Don't try it. So there is such thing as a right and wrong. Right is which conforms to God's character. Wrong is that which that it opposes God's character, and that's called sin or error or wrong, whatever you want to label that. We believe that there are absolute, universal, binding moral norms. They are rooted in God's own character, and then therefore they apply to all people, all cultures, and all times, because God is unchanging. So there is the Christian worldview. Notice that, because we're going to finish up here, and we're going to start with the modern worldview next week. Notice that in the title there it says, and its pre-modern cousins. So modernism came about in the and probably around about the 17th century, 17th to 18th century. Modernism started to gain its roots. But before that, and even in around that time, even if you weren't a Christian in the West, you had some presuppositions which are essentially Christian. You believed, and I think it's at the top of page 14, you believed that God exists, knowledge is possible, man is a unique part of the cosmos, and can have some sort of relationship with God, and that good and evil are objective, and they are knowable. All right, so you believed those things if you're part of the Christian worldview, by and large. You know, we're talking about generalizations here, so those were things that you believed, even if you weren't a Christian per se. You might have rejected Christ, you might have not accepted Christ as your Saviour, but you would just understand that this is the way that the world works. There is a God. Knowledge is possible. Man's unique. Good and evil are objective things. And so the pre-modern worldview actually lines up very closely with the Christian worldview. Obviously, there's a massive linchpin that is a difference, which is faith in Christ, right? So we need to realise that pre-modern worldviews are the dominant worldviews through Europe and through what we would call the West. So we've got the North America, our part of the world. Although, to be fair, Australia and New Zealand hadn't had the Western influence come down really by the 16th, 17th century. And so we also need to realise that those traditions, our pre-modern worldview and even our Christian worldview, it has some, I don't want to say roots, but it has some influence from the likes of the Greek philosophers, and it has influence from Roman thought back in, even back from the time of Christ, and the Greek philosophers like Plato, Aristotle. We just need to realise that that's part of the Christian, the underlying basis of which the Christian worldview has been built on. And sometimes that is absolutely fine. Sometimes those things we need to realise that there's a couple of things in there that perhaps we need to interact with and put aside. One of the things that Plato, just as an example, you might be thinking, okay, so what might we put aside? So Plato, one of the things that he stressed is that the spiritual, the whole objective of life here on earth is to attain to the spiritual and concentrate on the spiritual and almost be at one with the spirit world, because the spiritual is good and the physical is bad. So Plato was rejecting the idea of the things of this world. The things of this world were almost universally bad because we want to concentrate on the spiritual, the mind and the spiritual. Now that had a massive influence in the way that through a long period of time that Christians looked at the new heavens and the new earth. Because the spiritual is good, the physical is bad, and a lot of Christian thought actually then rejected the idea of a physical new heaven and new earth. It was all going to be spiritual. And you've seen the cartoons or the likes of when you go to heaven, you're floating on the clouds playing the harp. That's Plato's influence, because the physical is bad, the spiritual is good. Heaven is only going to be this ethereal kind of place where we're floating around on clouds. Well, go back to the Bible and we see that the new heaven and the new earth is a physical place. It is a new earth. It is a new physical place. It's been made new, whether the old one's completely gone and a new one's in its place, or whether the old one is made new. There's debate around that, but it's going to be a physical place, and we're physically going to live with God forever in the new heaven and the new earth. So there's elements. We just need to realise that there's elements of that Greek philosophy and Roman philosophy that have crept through Christianity, and it's good to identify those, kind of pull them out where we need to, and just realise that the Bible is always where we need to come back to. Right, so we finished the Christian worldview there. We're going to look at the modern worldview next week, and hopefully we'll just look through the modern worldview and the postmodern worldview. There's a bit to unpack in those.